shocking crimes that changed the world. The gruesome murder of Kitty Genovese, the crime that proved we real just watching, at least, until 911. The chilling case of Kitty Genovese, the murder that changed America and created 911. On March 13, 1964, a horrific crime took place in Kew Gardens, Queens, that would not only shock New York City, but also change the way America responded to emergencies. Catherine "Kitty" Genovese, a 28-year-old bartender, was brutally attacked and murdered near her home. What made this case infamous was the media's claim that 38 witnesses saw or heard the attack, but did nothing to help. A story that led to the concept of the bystander effect and helped shape the creation of the 911 emergency system. But was the media's version of events accurate, or was it an exaggerated narrative that distorted the truth? Let us uncover what really happened on that fateful night and how this crime forever changed America and perhaps the entire world. The night of the murder. In the early hours of March 13, 1964, Kitty Genovese was returning home from work at Ev's 11th hour bar when she parked her car about 100 feet from her apartment. At approximately 3:15 a.m., as she was walking toward her building, she was attacked from behind by a man later identified as Winston Mosley. He stabbed her twice in the back, causing her to scream, "Oh my God! He stabbed me! Help me!" According to police reports, several lights turned on in nearby apartments, and a few residents peeked out of their windows. One neighbor, Robert Moser, allegedly shouted, "Leave that girl alone," which caused Mosley to temporarily flee. Wounded and in pain, Kitty managed to stumble toward the rear entrance of her building. However, about 10 minutes later, Mosley returned, searching for her. Finding her collapsed near the building entrance, he stabbed her multiple times, sexually assaulted her, and stole her money before fleeing. She was found minutes later by a neighbor, Sophia Farrar, who held her as they waited for an ambulance. Kitty was pronounced dead en route to the hospital. The media's version of events. New York Times coverage on March 27, 1964. The New York Times ran an article titled, "37 Who Saw Murder Didn't Call the Police," alleging that multiple neighbors heard or witnessed Genovese's murder, but did nothing to help her. The report was prompted by a conversation between Times editor Monsieur Rosenthal and Police Commissioner Michael Murphy, during which Murphy made the claim that was the basis for the article. The newspaper followed it up the next day with an analysis speaking to several experts on the psychology of why people would choose not to get involved. Later in the year, Rosenthal adapted this information into a book called 38 Witnesses, The Kitty Genovese Case. The New York Times coverage has been criticized for numerous factual errors and accused of contriving a social phenomenon for sensationalistic purposes. The article, written by Martin Gansberg, claimed that 38 witnesses saw or heard the attack, but did nothing to help. The story painted an image of urban apathy, suggesting that people were either too indifferent or too afraid to intervene. This version of events outraged the public and led to widespread debates about the morality of modern society. The case became a symbol of cold-hearted bystander behavior, sparking discussions in psychology, criminology, and urban sociology. But was this version of events accurate? We shall come to this question presently. Who was Kitty Genovese? Catherine Susan. Kitty Genovese was born in Brooklyn, New York, on July 7, 1935, to parents Vincent and Rachel Genovese. The oldest of 5 children, Genovese was a graduate of Prospect Heights High School and remembered as a very good student and voted class cut-up in her senior year. Following her graduation in 1953, Genovese's mother witnessed a murder on the streets, which motivated the family to move to New Canaan, Connecticut. Kitty Genovese, however, remained in New York City working as a secretary at an insurance company and working nights at Ev's 11th hour. a bar in the Hollis neighborhood of Queens, first as a bartender, then as the manager, prompting her to move to Queens. In the early morning hours of March 13th, 1964, Kitty Genovese, Catherine Genovese, 1935-1964, was returning home from work when she was murdered by Winston Moseley, a Queens resident who had recently killed 2 other women. 2 weeks later, the crime was sensationalized in a New York Times article, which stated that 38 witnesses did nothing as Genovese was repeatedly attacked. The story captivated people for decades, though most of it was a myth. A neighbor, for example, stayed with her as she was dying. In a 2016 article, the Times revisited its 1964 piece and acknowledged its pivotal role in creating what is referred to as Kitty Genovese syndrome. Over the years, Genovese became so associated with her murder and bystander apathy that until fairly recently, little focus has been given on who she was before her untimely death. Raised in Park Slope, Brooklyn, Genovese was a popular student at Prospect Heights High School. Just after graduation, she chose to remain in the city when her parents moved the family to Connecticut in 1954. One aspect of the city that likely convinced her to stay was its gay life, which even in the largely closeted pre-Stonewall era offered a stronger sense of LGBT community than most other places. In March 1963, she began dating Mary Ann Zielonko. They met at the Swing Rendezvous, a lesbian bar in Greenwich Village. Genovese and Zielonko eventually moved to an apartment at 8270 Austin Street in the middle-class neighborhood of Kew Gardens, Queens. According to Zielonko, they were together exactly 1 year before Genovese's murder, and it was Zielonko, her roommate, who was awakened by police and asked to identify the body at the morgue. Being a gay woman in that society was very hard, so we were in the closet a lot. In fact, her family didn't know. I mean, they know now, but there was denial there. It was very hard then. At the time of her death, Genovese was a bar manager at Ev's 11th Hour Sports Bar at 19314 Jamaica Avenue in Hollis. In the documentary The Witness, 2015, her male co-workers mention that they knew she was gay. The investigation. It was 4 a.m. when police knocked on the apartment door and informed Zielonko about the stabbing and Genovese's death. It wasn't until around 7 a.m. that Detective Mitchell Sang arrived to question Zielonko, who was being consoled with liquor by neighbor Carl Ross. Sang found Ross intrusive to the questioning and arrested him for disorderly conduct. Sang also knew that Genovese's body was discovered lying at the bottom of the stairs leading to Ross' apartment. Later, homicide detectives John Carroll and Jerry Burns arrived and grilled Zielonko on her relationship with Genovese. The questioning took an inappropriate turn, focusing on their sex life, and lasted for 6 hours. Much of the police questioning of neighbors revealed a preoccupation with the gay lifestyle. Zielonko was considered a suspect. Murder of Kitty Genovese solved. Later that week, police got a call about a suspected robbery. When police showed up, they found a television in the trunk of the suspect's car. The man, Winston Moseley, was arrested and taken to the station, where he confessed to stealing appliances dozens of times. Moseley drove a white Corvair, and this struck Detective John Tartaglia, who remembered that some witnesses to Genovese's murder had reported seeing a white car. This was mentioned to Moseley, who said nothing. Tartaglia called in detectives John Carroll and Mitchell Sang. They noticed scabs on Moseley's hands and accused him of killing Genovese. Moseley replied that he had, and confirmed information that only the murderer would know. Winston Moseley, the murderer. Winston Moseley was born in Manhattan on March 2, 1935, to Fannie Moseley. Her husband, Alphonse Moseley, was not his biological father, a fact withheld from the boy until late in his childhood. His parents were often separated. Winston grew up a bright but troubled boy, who had an inordinate fascination with ants. Mr. Moseley seemed an unlikely serial killer. Soft-spoken, intelligent, with no criminal record, he was 29, a married father of two who owned his home in South Ozone Park, Queens, and operated business machines in Mount Vernon, NY. Later, in confessions and testimony, he said he had driven around late at night seeking victims and had killed 3 women, raped 8, and committed 30 or 40 burglaries. He had been cruising around for more than an hour on March 13, 1964, when around 3:15 a.m. he encountered Kitty Genovese, known as Kitty, the manager of a bar in Hollis, Queens, as she was driving home after work. He followed her to the parking lot of the Long Island Railroad station in Kew Gardens, near a faux Tudor building on Austin Street, where she shared an apartment with another woman. He followed her on foot as she walked toward her building, heading for its residential entry in the rear. She saw him coming and, frightened, ran. He chased her, caught up with her outside a darkened bookstore and, by his own account, stabbed her twice in the back with a hunting knife. Ms. Genovese, 28, cried, "Oh my God, he stabbed me! Help me! Help me!" and was heard in apartments overhead, perhaps by a dozen people. The number was never precisely determined. Lights went on. Eyes looked out. "I heard a girl saying, 'Help me, help me,'" Robert Moser testified. "It wasn't a scream, more of a cry. I got up and looked out, and across the street a girl was kneeling down, and this fellow was bending over her. I hollered, 'Hey, get out of there! What are you doing?' He jumped up and ran like a scared rabbit. She got up and walked out of sight around a corner." In his confession, Mr. Mosley said, "I had a feeling this man would close his window and go back to sleep, and sure enough he did." In court he said, "I realized the car was parked where people could see it and me, so I moved it some distance away." Mr. Mosley also said he had changed from a stocking cap to a wide-brim hat to cover his face, then walked back to the scene. "I came back because I'd not finished what I set out to do," he testified. He found Ms. Genovese lying in a hallway at the rear of the building. She was twisting and turning on the floor, bleeding and still crying for help, he recalled. He resumed his attack, "And I don't know how many times or where I stabbed her till she was fairly quiet." Investigators said he stabbed her a dozen times, stifling her last cries and raping her before escaping. Captured 5 days later during a burglary, Mr. Mosley confessed to the murders of Ms. Genovese and 2 other Queens residents, Annie Mae Johnson, 24, who had been shot and burned to death in her South Ozone Park apartment in February, and Barbara Kralik, 15, who had been stabbed in her parents' Springfield Gardens home the previous July. Both women had been sexually assaulted. Mr. Mosley was never tried for murdering Ms. Johnson or Ms. Kralik, though he recited details only the killer could have known, the police said. He testified at the trial of Alvin Mitchell, who had already been charged in Ms. Kralik's murder. The conflicting accounts left a hung jury. Mr. Mitchell was convicted in a second trial. At his own trial, Mr. Mosley pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity in the killing of Ms. Genovese, but was found legally sane, convicted of first-degree murder, and sentenced to death at a time when New York State still employed the electric chair. The state abolished the death penalty in 1965 for all but limited circumstances. As spectators cheered the verdict, the presiding judge, Justice Erwin J. Shapiro of State Supreme Court, said he did not believe in capital punishment, but added, "I must say I feel this may be improper when I see this monster. I wouldn't hesitate to pull the switch on him myself." Mr. Mosley and his first wife, Pauline, whom he married in 1954, were divorced. In 1961, he married Elizabeth Grant. At the time of the 1963 and 1964 crimes that Mr. Mosley acknowledged, his wife was a night shift hospital nurse. His mother lived with them and shared childcare duties. Law enforcement officials said the arrangement facilitated Mr. Mosley's nighttime prowls and criminal activities. In 1967, the State Court of Appeals cut his death sentence to life imprisonment on the grounds that the trial court had erred by disallowing evidence of Mr. Mosley's mental condition at a hearing to determine the severity of his sentence. In 1968, on the visit to a Buffalo hospital for treatment of a self-inflicted injury at Attica, Mr. Mosley overpowered a guard, took his gun, and fled. In his several days on the loose, he took 5 hostages and raped a woman before he was finally recaptured by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He received 2 15-year terms to run concurrently with his life sentence. After Mr. Mosley earned a bachelor's degree in sociology from Niagara University in 1977, The Times published an op-ed article by him, in which he expressed his regret for killing Ms. Genovese and said he was a changed man, determined to do constructive, not destructive, things. Many viewed the article as an attempt to lay the groundwork for his seeking his release in a series of later parole hearings, all of which denied him freedom. Mosley had spotted Genovese at a traffic light while he sat in his parked car and then followed her home. He had been driving around Queens looking for a victim, but gave no motive for the attack. Mosley was married with 3 children and had no prior record. Later interrogations would have Mosley confess to several other rapes and 2 other murders, those of Annie Mae Johnson and Barbara Krelick. Mosley was sentenced to death on June 15, 1964. It was reduced to a life sentence in 1967. He would later claim that a mobster executed Genovese and he was only the getaway driver. Mosley's son has stated that he believes Mosley attacked Genovese because she yelled racial slurs at him. Mosley died in jail on March 28, 2016, at 81 years old. The truth behind the case. Years later, investigations and interviews revealed that the original story was largely exaggerated and misrepresented. There were not 38 passive witnesses. Really, some people heard the screams, but did not see the attack clearly. Others assumed it was a domestic dispute and did not recognize the severity of the situation. In fact, several people did take action. A neighbor, Robert Moser, shouted at the attacker, which temporarily scared him off. Another neighbor, Carl Ross, called 2 friends for advice before finally calling the police. Sophia Farrar, a friend of Kitty's, rushed to her side to comfort her in her final moments. Invariably, the timeline of the attack was misunderstood. Reports made it seem like a continuous 30-minute attack, but in reality, the first attack lasted a few minutes, and there was a gap of about 10 minutes before Mosley returned. During this time, some neighbors thought the situation had ended and went back to sleep. How this crime changed America. Despite the media's sensationalized version, the Kitty Genovese case led to real change in how people respond to emergencies. 1. Birth of the 911 emergency number. Before this case, calling the police was complicated. People had to dial local precinct numbers instead of a universal emergency line. In 1968, just a few years after Kitty's murder, the 911 system was introduced, making it easier for citizens to quickly report crimes and get help. And 2. Psychological research on the bystander effect. Psychologists John Darley and Bibb Latané studied how individuals are less likely to intervene when others are around, a phenomenon they called the bystander effect. Their research helped shape modern emergency training, workplace safety policies, and public awareness campaigns. 3. Public awareness of crime prevention. The case led to neighborhood watch programs and discussions on moral responsibility in urban settings. The concept of, if you see something, say something, became a key principle in crime prevention. Bystander effect. The bystander effect is a psychological phenomenon where individuals are less likely to help someone in distress when other people are present. The more bystanders there are, the lower the chances that any one person will intervene. Causes of the bystander effect. Diffusion of responsibility. When more people are around, individuals feel less personally responsible for taking action, assuming someone else will step in. Pluralistic ignorance. People look to others for cues on how to react. If no one else appears concerned, they may assume there's no real emergency. Fear of social judgment, audience inhibition. People may hesitate to act because they fear embarrassment if they misinterpret the situation or act inappropriately. Famous experiments and studies. Latany and Darley in 1968 conducted laboratory experiments where participants were placed in situations where someone needed help. They found that people were much less likely to help when they believed others were also present. Smoke-filled room. Experiment. Participants sat in a room filling out a questionnaire when smoke started seeping in. When alone, they reported the smoke quickly, but when with others who ignored it, they stayed silent, assuming there was no real danger. Real-world implications. The Kitty Genovese case brought widespread attention to the bystander effect. It explains why crowds may ignore crimes, accidents, or bullying, expecting others to act. Awareness of this effect has led to Good Samaritan laws and training programs that encourage people to take responsibility and intervene in emergencies. How to overcome the bystander effect. Be aware of the effect and recognize that hesitation is natural. Take personal responsibility rather than assuming someone else will help. Make eye contact or directly ask a specific person for help. This reduces diffusion of responsibility. Encourage a culture of helping, especially in workplaces, schools, and public spaces. The phenomenon, called the bystander effect or the Genovese syndrome, attempts to explain why someone witnessing a crime would not help the victim. Psychologists Bibb Latané and John Darley made their careers studying the bystander effect and have shown in clinical experiments that witnesses are less likely to help a crime victim if there are other witnesses. The more witnesses, the less likely any one person will intervene. The bystander effect was used by the press as a parable of a morally bankrupt modern society losing its compassion for others, particularly in large cities. The birth of 911. The Kitty Genovese case shocked the nation and sparked discussions about public responsibility and the bystander effect, where individuals are less likely to help when they believe others will. One major issue highlighted was the lack of a simple, nationwide emergency number that people could call instantly. In 1967, President Lyndon B. Johnson's Commission on Law Enforcement and Administration of Justice recommended creating a universal emergency number to improve response times. In 1968, AT&T announced 911 as the official emergency number in the U.S. The first ever 911 call was made on February 16, 1968, in Haleyville, Alabama, by Alabama Speaker of the House Rankin Fite. Over the next few decades, cities across the U.S. adopted 911 as the standard emergency number. By 1987, 50% of the U.S. population had access to 911. Today, 911 is used in nearly all U.S. cities, and variations of it, such as 112 in Europe and 999 in the UK, have been adopted worldwide. Final thoughts and what can be learnt from the Kitty Genovese case. The murder of Kitty Genovese became one of the most infamous cases in psychology, shaping our understanding of the bystander effect and human social behavior. While later research showed that aspects of the original news reports were exaggerated, the case still serves as a powerful lesson in the psychology of inaction. What then are the key takeaways from this case? Awareness of the bystander effect can lead to change. Understanding that people tend to hesitate in emergencies due to diffusion of responsibility can help individuals recognize this tendency and make a conscious effort to step forward. Taking personal responsibility is crucial. Instead of assuming someone else will act, we should take personal initiative in emergencies, whether by directly helping or calling for assistance. The power of social influence. People often look to others for cues on how to react. If one person acts, others are more likely to follow. Being the first to intervene can break the cycle of inaction. Encouraging a culture of helping public awareness campaigns, laws like Good Samaritan protections, and training programs, such as bystander intervention workshops, aim to empower people to act rather than remain passive. Though tragic, the Kitty Genovese case sparked decades of research and social change, emphasizing the need for people to overcome hesitation and help others in crisis. It reminds us that even one person's actions can make a difference. The murder of Kitty Genovese became one of the most infamous cases of bystander apathy. But even decades later, we still see cases where people hesitate to intervene in emergencies. Do you think the bystander effect is still as strong today, or has social awareness changed how we react? Have you ever witnessed a situation where people stood by instead of helping? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. If you found this case as thought-provoking as I did, make sure to hit the like button and share this video to keep the conversation going. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more in-depth crime stories like this one. Thanks for watching and stay aware, because sometimes one voice can make all the difference.